So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the overview. So welcome from EPIP. We are emerging practitioners in philanthropy, and we are a national network of foundation professionals, social entrepreneurs, and change makers who are striving for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. We just came off of our wonderful national conference in September. It was great to be with so many people live in the room and not just online. So we're actually in the process of building our strategic plan and getting people's voices integrated into that process and planning. So it's an exciting time for EPIP as we're growing forward. What we've been known for doing and what we do currently is provide a platform for our community to connect with others, to learn and practice leadership skills, and to inspire emerging ideas in the social sector. If you have questions about what we do or how to get involved, maybe join as a member or learn more about the programs that are upcoming or ongoing, please feel free to reach out. My email is on the screen right now. It's B as in boy, I, Z as in zebra at epip.org. And I'm happy to answer any questions I'm able to. So please drop a line. To give you a sense of some upcoming events for us at EPIP, the next EPIP webinars are scheduled actually for the next two weeks. So on the 19th, which is a week from today, at this time, we'll be focusing on intersectional giving, reconnecting race, social, and gender justice for more effective grant making. You can register for that webinar online at epip.org/events. And then the week following, on October 26th, we'll also be here again at 3 p.m. Eastern with Tamir Namatny, our executive director, and some folks from our strategic planning team to talk to you about how far we've come along, what we're looking at, what we're up to, and to get you involved in and learning what our trajectory is looking like. Some housekeeping for today's call. You'll see in your control panel that there is a question box. Please feel free to use that to type in any sort of technical difficulties you may have. I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot those. If you have comments or questions that come out throughout the content that is presented, please put your questions in there so that our speakers can see your question and hopefully either integrate it into their comments or directly answer the question. We're going to be doing a couple polls, and our polls and questions will be anonymous, so you know. If you're going to be following us online for the webinar today, posting on social media, you can use the hashtag EPIPwebinar to tag your comments. We are recording the webinar, and at the very end, when the call ends, there'll be a quick few question, I think it's a 7-question survey that's sent to you, multiple choice, hopefully only takes you a few seconds to complete, but any feedback you can provide is really helpful for us to try and provide the most relevant and valuable information for you in this webinar program. So please take a moment if you can and complete that survey. So for today, I'm almost done with our introduction, but I'm going to take a moment right now to run some polls to get a sense who's here, and then turn the mic over to James, who will introduce Sarah. As I mentioned, questions, please feel free to post them throughout the conversation. There will be time, hopefully at the end, if there are kind of big picture questions, but we've designed today's conversation to incorporate your feedback and thoughts as we go along. So please don't hesitate to ask questions as they come to you. So we can get a sense of who's with us today. I'm going to run a couple quick anonymous polls. The first one is up now. If you could please respond by clicking the choice that best describes your employer. All right, I'm going to close it down in just 1 second if anyone else needs to vote. It looks like the majority of folks with us today are from foundations. Welcome to everybody. And then nonprofits, corporations, philanthropic advisory firms, and folks whose roles are better matched for titles outside of those categories. So welcome to everybody. The next question is really to get a sense of you and your experience with the content So if you can give us a sense of your experience with impact measurement, which of these statements best describes your experience level? Thanks. Great. So some familiarity, a couple experts, and some folks that are new to the topic. So a wide range of expertise. Awesome. So I just wanted to flag also that we are going to be sharing that article I mentioned, as well as some resources. The handouts, we couldn't get into the control panel, but I'll be sure to send them to everyone who's live on the call as soon as we're done. And this will be up in the archive for you to reach back to after we finish the call today. But for now, I would love to welcome our guest speakers, James Halliday and Sara Olsen from the SVT Group. I'm really excited to have both of you here and learn from your expertise. So James, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks, Biz. And welcome to Sara as well. I'll get to the intro shortly. I wanted to say hi to everyone joining the webinar today. Just a little to add to the housekeeping and sort of the flow for our conversation. Sara's got a presentation that we're going to go through, and I want to welcome everyone to share questions at any point during that presentation. I'll be interjecting with my own questions as well as those questions that you post, but we're going to leave it to Sara to walk us through her work. And so let me just transition to an introduction for you all. So Sara's been recognized twice as one of America's most promising social entrepreneurs by Bloomberg Businessweek for her work in defining impact management as a discipline. She founded the SVT Group in 2001, and the team there have become subject matter experts in measuring social and environmental value of approximately $9 billion in private equity, debt, and grants in dozens of countries and issue areas. Some of her recent clients include Yo-Yo Ma, Restore the Earth Foundation, Fair Trade USA, and the Global Fund for Women, and CalPERS Environmental Investment Advisor. She's also an adjunct professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and the Holt International Business School. And she's been very involved with an organization which I think she'll talk about today. She's co-chair of the Methodology Committee at Social Value International and a founding board member of Social Value United States. So with that, I want to welcome Sara to the call and to get her presentation up and going.
Thank you so much, James. I'm showing my screen now, if you'll let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it live, and it looks like now we can see the presenter view, so we can see all the slides on the bottom and the side too. Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for inviting me to come and speak with you and have a discussion about this topic. So the goal here is to make this practical and actionable while grounding what I present here in theory and in the context of a rapidly evolving professional landscape. So I'll start by giving you a little bit about how I got into this. I began working on topics in poverty alleviation basically because after college I went to live in the Mississippi Delta for a couple of years with a friend who had joined the Mississippi Teacher Corps. And I was totally unprepared to confront the developing world conditions that occurred there. So that was kind of my epiphany that things are not working the way that I had been led to believe in the United States, and I really felt compelled to try to figure out what can I do to address this multi-generational cycle of poverty. So I started pulling on that thread. I ended up working in social entrepreneurship a couple years later, kind of coming out of my Master's of Social Service Administration at the University of Chicago, which I had gone to in hopes that it would sort of give me some qualifications for doing something about this. And what I had done is I'd learned about social entrepreneurship kind of by chance, became involved in helping to run a small social enterprise. And that experience where we were working with at-risk youth after school in a design studio where they would come in and be a part of creating customized artwork for paying customers like corporations and the city of Chicago. So they were earning money while learning about teamwork and why it was important to show up on time and why they need to learn math so they could calculate the tax on their sale and things like that. In that context, we had the potential to become revenue self-sufficient, and our funding was coming from foundations who viewed us as a nonprofit of whatever stripe. So either we were a social enterprise, we were an at-risk youth program, we were an arts program, or we were some combination of those things. And it was often difficult for the funders to get comfortable funding this hybrid program because they always felt like we didn't quite perfectly align with their mission. So, so the frustrations that we sometimes encountered with funders led me to begin to think, you know, if we could talk more about what our impact is and have a language and a discipline, a skill set that was shared by the funder and the the one who is seeking the money, that would help to change the conversation and potentially help the flow of money to really go where it could be effective at solving social problems. But lacking that skill set, we were sort of in this tragic problem that never could get solved because money would be structured in a way that was too short term. The wrong things would get counted. So there would be an attention to how many kids were walking in the door, but not whether any of them was getting the necessary support to have a meaningful and helpful experience and you know, achieve some growth. So that drove me kind of into this idea, gee, what if we had a new discipline? What if there were a profession of skilled impact analysts? And so I started SVT Group after I got an MBA in 2001, and we've worked, as James said, with a wide variety of actors, all of whom believe that that it is powerful to understand and measure and manage your impact and to communicate your impact. So, so that is the topic that we'll be addressing here, and I have to give a lot of credit to Kate Ruff, who is my co-author with on the Stanford Social Innovation Review article, who really put a fine point on this idea that this is a role, this idea of a skilled impact analyst is a role that people can play. It's not this abstract idea of an emerging discipline, which is how I had always thought about it. So, so I'm very grateful to have met Kate about 1.5 years ago, and she's brilliant, and hopefully you'll get her on here another time. So, so basically, sort of the theoretical underpinnings of this are that if human beings value a variety of things, we value our families, our health, our relationships, our freedom, and our opportunities. We value being able to breathe clean air and wear clothing and eat food, you know, things that we sort of take for granted most of the time. And we certainly value having the wealth to give us options about how we want to live our lives. But our private financial wealth, the money in my pocket, if that is financial value, that's only a small sliver of all of the things that people value. And what we have today is a universal, you know, global system of accounting for financial value, which essentially disregards most of what people actually value and presumes that the accounting and the pricing mechanism that financial accounting relies upon is integrating those kinds of things that are happening outside of my personal financial gain. So we have this system that imperfectly tries to include these these other considerations of what people value, but it doesn't do it very well. And we see that all over the place, whether it's, endemic poverty, growing inequality, environmental degradation, all kinds of things that are problems that are aggravated oftentimes by the activities of business and even the activities of philanthropy. And we need a better mechanism for accounting for the value that people actually care about. That's what social and environmental impact accounting is, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is kind of this toolkit. So you guys, most of you are either running a nonprofit or working in one, or you are funding them. You may also be making investments in for-profit organizations that have a social or environmental character. And all of us are putting our own savings into a variety of investments. All of those have impact. And if we wish to view ourselves as professionals in this domain of trying to create more social good in the world, then we need to be accountable for whether we are in fact doing that. If we don't measure it, we can't really manage to impact. But of course, it's this hairy question: how do you actually measure impact? When I tell people that my business measures impact, the first question out of their mouths is often, how do you measure impact? And I think that what they're talking about, what they're getting at, is rooted in some basic concepts, which I'll get into. Sometimes they might be thinking, how can you measure whether an organization is living up to a sort of definition of social responsibility, which would consider what general social value that entity is potentially generating. Is it living up to the social contract? So they might be asking about that, or they might be asking about how would you measure a specific change that a given entity might be creating. Now that is something that might be important only to a small number of people, and indeed some people might view a given impact as a good thing, while other people might view it as the same impact as a bad thing. And that's where it starts to get really thorny, where you can measure a change that's driven by a specific initiative, and then separately there's this question of how do you value it? Is it important? Is it important in a good way? Is it important in a bad way? That is an issue of how you value the impact. So there's kind of these two poles, and we see solutions to this problem of how to measure impact that fall under either of these two poles, and they're different. So the general social contract, you can assess it most easily by looking to a sort of standardized checklist approach. Many of you probably have heard of B Corporation. Some of you might have heard of the Global Reporting Initiative. Those are essentially a set of questions that any company can go through and answer to assess whether they are behaving in sort of an environmentally and socially responsible way, as defined by a group of experts who got together in a room over time and sort of came up with a list of considerations that speak to the general social contract in that society. So examples of this we see around us, and mostly when you have a large company trying to talk to its environmental and social performance, this is the approach that they would use, partly because they have very large and complicated operations, and for them to try to measure specific changes that result in the environment or in people's well-being as a result of all the different things they're doing is almost an impossibly complicated task. So instead they do it this way. By contrast, if you wanted to actually measure a change that specifically has been caused by a certain intervention, it is more viable to not look to a predetermined set of metrics and instead to work through a series of judgments, a sort of process that leads you through a set of judgment calls, which you can make in a way that the community of practitioners who do this have determined is the good enough way. There is a whole profession of evaluators, which has been around for many decades, who have learned how to assess the impact of an organization, and they basically use these principles. Other examples are social value analysis and SROI. So these are tools that can be learned, but they are not quite as easy as just answering a set of predefined questions. So they do imply that you have some skill and some training in how to work through this process. And that skill set, essentially, if what you want to do is produce an analysis of impact to create a report on your own organization or create one on another entity, these are the steps that you would basically work through. You define the mission of the organization. You understand who the stakeholders are that are affected by or who affect the organization or the program or the company. You analyze what is the logic that entity is applying that says, if we do these things, this ultimate impact will occur, and here's the evidence that we are basing that logic upon. That's a theory of change. You map the impact, where you break apart what are the resources that go into the activities from the activities themselves, and then the measurable products and byproducts of those activities, and then what are the outcomes that result from those outputs, as they're called. And then you think about what are the changes, the outcomes that would have happened even if this program didn't occur. So that's the base case, and you subtract that base case from the outcomes. That's mapping impact. It's also known as a logic model. And lastly, as you've isolated what those changes are that are happening that likely would not have otherwise happened, you need to assess whether they are important or not, and to which stakeholders are they important. That's the assessing value step. And lastly, you need to determine what are some indicators that make sense to track on a recurring basis to gauge progress toward your objectives, and to make sure that you're not missing something important that might be coming up that might not be what you intended. So these basic tools are a skill set that can be learned. I'm sure many of you have been acquainted with these. If not, you may be using them every day. But that is essentially what the impact management skill set looks like. I would caution folks that even when a lot of organizations are articulating a theory of change now, they may not be being very realistic about what is possible to achieve with the resources they actually have available. And this, I think, is endemic across a lot of philanthropy and nonprofit work, where people get into the work because they feel called to try to move a huge, complicated problem. And they just go into it without really thinking about realistically what do they need to make happen. And that can become a default mode. But the problem with that is that you then have a kind of pie in the sky problem where you're going to work every day and trying to make ends meet and make stuff happen, but in reality, it's not that likely that things are going to change very much. So confronting that problem is necessary. Yes, go ahead.
Just wanted to jump in before we turn to the next sort of part of the presentation. You mentioned the role of evaluators, and that is a position that's been around for decades. And at the outset, you introduced this new role of social impact analyst. Could you briefly just sort of tell us, sort of define evaluator? I know it's a very basic term, but to differentiate between the evaluator of old, what those traditional competencies or expectations are in that realm versus what we're talking about here for impact management and the new role of the social impact analyst.
Great question. Now, I will tell you that I come from the more market-based impact measurement world, which is a world where the impetus for measuring and managing impact comes from the organization itself, because it believes that it needs to know whether it is achieving its set objectives, because that's why it's in business. And so it's doing it voluntarily typically, or it's doing it because the market will actually pay for that information in some fashion. I am not from the world of more traditional evaluation, where there is a funder, typically very often the government, who is wanting to make sure that their resources have been used in accordance with the plan that was set out at the beginning. That is most often the context in which evaluation is done. So broadly speaking, evaluation is an exercise designed to confirm whether a given intervention was done in the way that it was set out to do, that was the plan, and then to assess what has changed as a result of doing that intervention. And it uses quite rigorous techniques of comparison group with the subject group to shake out whether the change that has been witnessed is because of the intervention or not. So the rigor of evaluation tends to be higher than what you see in the more market-driven context. But the problem with that is that there are constraints one must place around an analysis in order to do an assessment of whether a specific intervention is actually causing a change. The most important of which is that you can't change the intervention as you go. So you can't necessarily integrate learnings along the way about whether this is the right design. So that's kind of a weakness of evaluation, and another of traditional evaluation. And another weakness is that people often experience it as costing a lot to do things to the level of rigor that most evaluators hold the profession to. Now that is not that's not totally fair to say of all of evaluation, because there are subsets and sort of pockets within the evaluation community who do more flexible kinds of analysis that are tailored to the situation. So if you don't have very many resources and it's a very fledgling operation, a lower sort of expectation of rigor is appropriate, and that is something that evaluators can employ. So in reality, what I am talking about could be said to be part of evaluation. And in fact, there's a gathering at the end of this month to bridge the evaluation community with the more market-based impact management world from which I come, and have a conversation about, like, should we all just like uniformly call this part of evaluation, and where are there similarities and where are there differences? So I would even have more to say, or a better answer for you after October 26th.
Great. I guess one quick follow-up would be that I think what you're about to outline here is, in the case of foundations or donors, where there is an expectation of results based on mission and an agreement that's been prescribed, there can be a traditionally sort of locked-in sense of what those expectations are, and I think you've used the word flexibility as a defining characteristic of the analyst. So if you could just set the stage on talking what has traditionally been sort of the approach around standardized social impact measures versus a more differentiated and flexible approach going forward, and maybe that's just a segue to the slide I'm looking at.
Well, I think that what we've seen is that everyone is bothered by the potential trade-off between spending your time and resources actually trying to do the work and make the world better, and this sort of intellectual exercise of measuring whether that actually happened. And in some cases, it's actually really, I think, unethical to spend time and resources measuring the impact when you could be potentially saving someone's life. But there's a lot of territory where over time, not paying attention to whether what you're doing is helping or actually potentially hurting the situation is, I think, a form of malpractice. And the main problem with which is that it doesn't get us to solutions. So I think that people would like to have a set of standardized metrics to take away the burden from the practitioner of having to figure out what should we be measuring. So there's a desire to just say, okay, for all organizations of a certain kind, maybe all community economic development organizations, let's just define a set of common indicators and everybody just speak to these. And that can be useful, but especially in a smaller group of organizations where they're all very similar and they've all agreed this makes sense, that can be appropriate. But as you pull up and try to aggregate a larger group of diverse types of approaches and different contexts, different geographies, different populations, what often happens is that those particular metrics that have been prescribed lose their relevance. So the uniformity of the metrics is convenient and helps you with rolling up all that data, but they don't necessarily capture what is important about what's really going on. And the people on the ground often are very frustrated that these measures don't really express what's actually important in this situation. So there's this tension, which sets up a skill set on the part of a skilled impact analyst to be able to take disparate information that's presented by each individual organization and compare it, because that expert impact analyst understands how to compare information on different types of organizations and even how to compare differently reported information. Does that answer your question, James?
Yeah, that gets to it. As we move forward, I'll elaborate.
Yeah. So thank you. So the tools that help to prevent having kind of lofty goals that are impossible to actually achieve, the tools that you might want to refer to are developing an impact map and a logic model that really helps you clarify what specific things are changing or do you want to make change by doing the activities that are planned or that have been done. And then how would you gauge those changes? So instead of defaulting to things that are easy to count, making sure that the gauge, the indicator of change is something that captures not just the number of things that have happened, but the number of things that have happened that wouldn't have otherwise happened, and is thoughtful about how you tease that out. Also, not just counting the number of things that have happened, but the quality of the numbers. So you may have 100 people on a webinar, but if none of them was actually listening, or if none of them felt the material was relevant to them, then they're not going to use it. So you want to not just count up the heads that came, but the subset of those people who actually found it to be useful. So that's the difference between a useful key performance indicator and one that is potentially harmful and misleading. There are other tools which we could talk about, but I think for the sake of time, I'll move ahead and we can return to these if that seems useful to folks. So what we began to talk about just then is that there's a toolkit that is needed to develop an assessment of a program or a company or an initiative. And that toolkit could be called impact management or impact accounting. Impact analysis is not the production of the report, it's the reading and using of the report to make decisions about how to allocate resources. So the role of a person who has this skill of impact analysis is to basically understand what am I looking at if I'm receiving a report about an organization's impact. What do I need to see? What are the things that can obscure my understanding of the actual impact because of the way the information is being presented to me? And how do I shake that apart? And how could I compare two very different organizations or two similar organizations who have reported differently? So the impact analyst needs to be able to tell whether what they're looking at presents a fair and true picture of what really happened. And if it does not, to sort of strip away the things that are interfering with an understanding of the actual impact. The things that affect this, the skills that the impact analyst has, are skills in understanding whether the reporting is transparent about key assumptions, key processes, how things have been done, what's included, what's not, what's the time period over which this analysis takes place. And so and other kinds of transparency matters. The skilled impact analyst must be able to understand important aspects of the scope of the information that's being reported. So what is left out? What am I not seeing here? And are those things important that they should be in here in order for us to understand truly what's happening? And then lastly, the skilled impact analyst needs to understand the measurement and analysis methods that have been used, so that they have a way of gauging whether this information might be biased, whether certain information has been generalized, which maybe is not appropriate to generalize, and then those things. This is a skill set that can be learned. Certainly evaluators understand this skill set, and people who are operating in the more market-driven context may need to have a version of that skill set that speaks to some of the pressures and opportunities that players who are operating in an environment where there's competition for customers and where you have investors, they may need to understand what are the differences from how evaluation would typically approach this. So Social Value United States is an organization that is a new chapter of an international organization called Social Value International, which has been piloting a professional certificate in skilled impact analysis. And anyone who's interested can take this training and then sit for an exam. And if they pass the exam, they can receive a credential in skilled impact analysis. That's just brand new this year and is going to be developed further over the next few years.
Sarah, I want to connect the discussion we've been having about and the definition you provided us with about the analyst with your work, and I know we're going to move on to about SVT, but if you could talk beforehand just about your work with foundations and some of these elements of the analyst and the roles currently within foundations that where these roles where they could lie, and in terms of adding capacity to foundations in the philanthropic landscape, what value SVT and yourself provide?
Yeah, there's I think a widely shared experience of a lot of foundations and a lot of nonprofit organizations and businesses that they worry that they might be behind the curve in terms of a practice around understanding and managing impact. People have this esteem for other folks, and they assume that other people know a lot more about how to do this than they do. That tends not to be all that true. The fact is that for a great number, probably the large majority of organizations, they're just beginning to kind of articulate a clear vision and mission and theory of change for how they expect to make change happen and to make investments and grants against that theory of change. And they're operating also as funders in an environment where the nonprofit partner may not have a lot of skill or resource with which to think about, what outcomes are we delivering, and how can we improve them. So I would encourage people not to worry if you're kind of early in this process, but certainly the trend is that more evidence-based decision making is what people would like to make happen and are making happen. So it's a good time to get involved in learning about this and in beginning to figure out how this translates into practice within your own organization. I would say that the clients that we've worked with span the whole gamut, from folks who have never articulated a theory of change and where we work with them to help them do that, to folks who have gathered some information, occasionally done some survey work, maybe had a randomized control trial study done here and there, but they don't have an overarching system for understanding and managing impact as they go along for their whole operation. And we often will get called in to help them design a system like that, maybe because their board has started to ask for it, or maybe because they want to go out for funding, and in the competition with other seekers of that same funding, they don't look as good when they don't really have this in hand. So so we work with folks sort of along the spectrum of the things here on this slide, in terms of getting their bearings, kind of who's doing what in our industry, articulating a theory of change, articulating metrics that the organization may particularly want to start tracking and start asking their grantees to track, helping them figure out how do they manage that information. Like, do they need to design a new tool that they can use, or is there an off-the-shelf product out there that can help them capture and manage and report using this information? We've just been working with the Gary Community Investments Group on how they report internally and externally about what they're learning on impact at the individual grantee level, at the sort of focus area level, and then across their whole portfolio of grants and investments. And then, part of what needs to happen is often that people need to get briefed on why are we needing to do this, and how do we do it, and how does it fit into my job. So we do a lot of professional development, so training, either in collaboration with academic partners or coming on site to an organization and designing a customized training.
Great.
I'd like to mention a couple of things also about what we are seeing in terms of the trends and the role that, in particular, philanthropy can play that almost nobody else at this point can play. And I think that philanthropy has sort of four real contributions to make alongside doing the work that it does as its meat and potatoes of providing resources to organizations working to make the world a better place. When it comes to improving the sort of practice around impact, using good quality impact information to inform resource allocation, it would be great, and it is already happening, if more and more foundations and philanthropists learned what good impact reporting involves. What are the skills of the impact analyst? What can we reasonably expect of our grantees? And to sort of set that expectation, because that creates a rationale for organizations to invest their time and resources in getting better at understanding really whether what they're doing is working. Building capacity, this takes some time to learn and to do. Very often organizations are strained to just get the basics done. Having to do something else on top of that is very difficult without funding. So building the capacity is an important role for philanthropy to play. Funding the research, it's nice if you have the scale of a program and a funding partner who can help you do a really high quality study over time that looks at your subject group and then looks at a comparison group and tracks what's the difference between them so that you can really understand what your impact is. But it's most often the case that organizations don't have that kind of money and time to put into this sort of assessment. So what would be nice is if there were high quality longitudinal studies on interventions and populations in subject matter that is close to what a lot of the practitioners out there are working on, that they can basically borrow to say, you know, if we do something that's like that with a population that's similar, over time we can potentially expect to see similar results. So we don't need to do a longitudinal perfect study for every single group. We just need to do it for like a group that in a place where there are a cluster of organizations working with similar populations and issues doing similar things, so that they can learn from and sort of borrow and extrapolate from that longitudinal research in their own tracking, which can be more simple. And then lastly, there's a ton of data out there already, but a lot of it is produced by the government, and it was never intended to be used by private sector actors who are allocating resources to try to move the needle on specific issues for specific populations of people. It was designed to inform policy and at the hugest scale that the government works at. So what we have been finding, and the Gary Community Investments organization is a really interesting example of this. What they have done is they've worked through a collaboration with a lot of other entities in Colorado who are all working on eradicating childhood poverty and family insecurity to obtain data about what is the current level of child poverty and current sort of baseline level of a number of different indicators that they want to watch and they want to try to influence in a positive direction over time. And they've worked hard over many years to pull together this information, but and a lot of it is from government sources. But the problem is that the information tends to be in the form of statistics rather than data. So it's published in a form of like there are this number of families living at 150% of the poverty line in this county. That information is not sufficiently granular, or even it's not the right information that the investment group would need if what they want to know is in these 10 neighborhoods, how many people are at what level relative to the poverty line, and how is that changing over time after we do a series of interventions. So you can see that the data that's being produced isn't that useful to them. It would be interesting if the government would make the data available in a different format so that it would be possible to obtain more granular analysis and match it up with what a given funder, given investor is doing in an effort to move the needle on certain indicators. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a question not just for me, but the participants on the call. And I want to encourage everyone, you've got about 10 minutes left in our hour to populate the questions box there with your questions and about your work relevant to the sectors and stakeholders that you might put to Sara. I've got a few more questions queued up for now, but I do want to leave this last 10 minutes for you all to get that out there. I was going to ask, so here's some practical resources that we can walk through. It was one of my questions was about tools that are available that foundations and folks working in foundations, and I think about 2/3 of the folks on this call, according to that poll, if I recall, are working in foundations. What tools and resources are available to them that they might start experimenting and looking into these matters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just provided this list of a few things that might be relevant. There are a lot of free resources that sort of walk you through the steps in developing a logic model or theory of change, in figuring out how to arrive at some key indicators that your organization might want to track over time. and some of the best are at Social Value International, socialvalueint.org. SVT offers a sort of coaching call where we can hear where you are with a number of diagnostic questions and then present you with a memo that gives you some ideas about where to get started or what you can do next. We also coach people through the process of defining their own metrics, and then obviously we work as your officer with certain clients over time who are ready to do this, but who don't necessarily want to internalize that staff role. There's also this group that is being formed just in the last year and a half or so of professional impact analysts or impact managers to be a professional home for that role, called Social Value United States. There's a LinkedIn group that has just been made public. It's a very, very young, small, tiny organization. And so if you want to become involved in that, that would be great. Please feel free to reach out to me if you would like to. There's an international version of that same network, which has chapters in like 45 countries and about 1,000 members, and is another place where you can go to sort of share learnings and raise questions and, you know, figure out what should this profession do, how should we do it. And then on that same front, there is this conference which you're all invited to attend right before the American Evaluation Association's annual meeting in Atlanta, called Impact Convergence. And it's a place to go if you are working on these topics, either from an evaluator's point of view or a more market-based point of view. Impact investors are definitely welcome and part of the agenda, and philanthropists as well. So that will be an exciting event. That's really the first time this profession has come together to think about itself as a profession.
Great, thank you for those. Here we go. We've got a question from Justice, and we bring that up. Justice's question is, can you say a bit more about measuring impact for groups that are not included in most statistics general population research?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the heart of impact management, impact analysis, has to be the stakeholder. So for any organization where there's not ready data being produced by somebody, which is, you know, the majority of nonprofit and social enterprises, the chances are you're going to have to go out and find out for yourself what the base case situation is and whether the intervention is changing people's lives in the ways that you would like to see. And the cornerstone of that is interviews with the stakeholder. You know, have a conversation with as many members of the stakeholder group as you can about what is changing for them and how important that is to them. This seems daunting a lot of times because it requires for us to get out of our comfort zone and go talk to strangers. A lot of people don't like doing it, but it's actually not too difficult to do it, and it's certainly a good practice for any nonprofit and any business to go out and find out what its customers would like to see happening. So that's the basic tool when there are no statistics that speak to your issue area. Of course, if you're in an environmental topic area, then you may need someone with a bit more scientific expertise, but there are a lot of people covering all kinds of areas in the environment these days, so hopefully you can tap into some of that expertise. Does that answer your question, Justice?
Thanks for the question, Justice. I'm not sure you're on mic, but feel free to follow up. Oh, yes it does. Thanks, says Justice.
Great, thanks.
I've got another question here from Ileana Lazarova, and her question is, how would you justify the approach of, and she's quoting from the SSIR article, quote, comparing apples to oranges, and if there is no comparability between projects, how do we know we are actually making change happen?
Well, I think that the reality of the work is that every different organization is working with a different population in a different geography, confronting different environmental factors. And so if we compare them all using the same set of metrics, we may be missing certain information that's important. We can do it, and it's okay to do it even. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but the problem comes when there's larger and larger pools of organizations that one needs to understand and analyze. I think for an individual organization or for a small group of organizations, having standardized metrics that they all have helped to define and believe are reflective of what they're doing is fine. But when it comes to rolling up very large, complicated portfolios of organizations, that's where the problem comes. And when we lack the skill set to understand what makes this one different from that one, and how do we then fairly compare them, if at all, when we don't have that skill set, then we aren't ever able to really aggregate our understanding of what's going on in the big picture. And you see this problem in aid. Aid has been given by the billions for decades, but no one really knows whether it has made a difference in aggregate. I'm not sure that I've totally answered your question, Ileana, and it's an interesting one. So if I could have more of a conversation with you, I would be happy to do that.
Thanks for your question, Ileana. I'm not seeing any more questions. I'm not seeing any more questions in the question box. I've got just a quote that I think is really illustrative from the article and sort of to capture today's conversation that I wanted to read and get Sarah's reaction from, which is, so cultivating an analyst who can make use of impact reports without influencing how organizations collect and measure impact data will enable the sector to share high-quality information through social capital markets, reduce the overall reporting burden, and disentangle values and valuations. And I think there's a lot in there, and maybe just as we close out, this question of values and valuation, we touched on before that that in financial accounting and sort of financial terms has been a way of expressing value or valuation. What are some other ways of capturing that you think analysts are doing best right now?
Well, you know, if you think of the analyst role as analogous to like a meteorologist, we all can watch the nightly news and the meteorologist explains sort of in lay terms what the weather's going to be, and that's based on a lot of very complex science, which the meteorologist knows how to interpret. This is similar to impact analysis, where there's one additional layer of complexity. So the analyst is able to look at complex and disparate, potentially, information about what's going on for a number of organizations or for a specific organization, and help interpret that to the decision maker who's trying to figure out, should I support this organization or not? So the impact analyst is acting like the meteorologist in that case, where the person writing the check doesn't have to have that expertise, but they can work with the impact analyst to understand what they need to know in order to make the decision. The additional layer of complexity in grant making or in impact investing is that the check writer has their own priorities. You know, they have their own set of values, which are not necessarily shared by everyone. It's not as simple as maximize my profit. You know, some people want to reduce homelessness, and some people want to educate children, and both are totally fine. So the impact analyst in that case potentially can be aware of and help the check writer to understand their own values and priorities, so that then the impact analyst can not only interpret what are we looking at here, but also can make some recommendations about whether it is in fact aligned with the check writer's values. It's a huge topic, and that, how does that get expressed if not in financial terms? I mean, basically by helping people to understand what's important to them and then helping to understand what is important to the stakeholders who are being affected. And that can be done by a conversation that literally asks, how important is this to you compared to something else? So that's a way of doing valuation that does not require translating things into financial terms. I hope that answered your question.
It begins to, and we're at the hour mark for today's webinar, and I want to thank the participants who contributed with their questions, and for everyone on today's call for listening in, and especially to Sara for all of her insights and for sharing her time today, and to Biz for organizing this. So thanks so much. Sara, I'll leave you with the last word if you want to say anything as before we sign off.
Well, it's a multi-layered subject that has its practical aspect, and it has its philosophical aspect, and its theoretical, and there's a lot to chew on there. So I would just encourage you to start, take the first step, read something, attend an event, just have a conversation about what's something that you could start doing that would be practical for your own organization, and then you'll begin to feel a greater comfort level, I think, with all of the complexity. So I hope this wasn't too overloaded, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys, and I'd be happy to follow up individually.
This is Biz. Thank you, Sara, both for your expertise and for leaving the door open for continued conversation. I think that will be a wonderful thing to have started today. So for folks who are wondering, the slides will be up online, and they will include the resources we talked about as well as the contact information that Sara has shared. So thank you so much. And James, really a huge thanks to you as well. Great job on the moderation, and thank you for bringing Sara to the community. I'm excited to see where your conversations go. And to anyone who's new to EPIP, welcome to your first webinar. We hope that we will see you at many more events to come. Please check out the website epip.org for future webinars and also regional events. There's a bunch of events in our chapters coming up, so we hope you'll get a chance to get more dug into the community. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.